Welcome back, and thanks for watching. Before I get started, I want to address some criticism I'm likely to receive. That is, how can I know what I'm talking about on this subject when I'm not a Muslim? But my opinions on the matter are not based on observing people different than me and attempting to understand how they could have different ways of thinking than myself. Instead, my opinions are informed by great thinkers who themselves have left the religion and stand as an example of the dangers of harmful ideologies. Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Salman Rushdie are two great examples. Rushdie had a fatwa placed on his head for simply writing a book criticizing Islam. Hirsi Ali had multiple fatwas for a film about the treatment of women in Islamic countries and speaking out against Islam. And in my opinion, Hirsi Ali should be a feminist hero for actually caring about the oppression of women around the globe. And yet, she is often villainized by liberals as an Islamophobe. Religions are ideologies. They determine how we think about the world and how we act. Christianity has been influenced by secular values mainly through Western culture and Enlightenment thinkers. But Islam hasn't overcome any such obstacles and needs to be reformed. The Islamic world didn't used to be as bad, but the rejection of science and embracing of theocracy has caused many issues. We of course must separate people from ideology. When I'm talking about Islam, I in no way mean all Muslims. I only mean the ideology and any individual who specifically does the things I'm talking about. Similarly, if I say that the Bible says stupid things about homosexuality, I'm not saying that Christians are stupid, I'm saying the idea is stupid. I'm saying that the authors of the Bible had no clue what they were talking about, and any individual alive today who actually agrees is mistaken. And furthermore, if they act upon these mistaken beliefs, then they're doing something stupid. In other words, holding a particular ideology isn't a problem, but acting upon it can be. That doesn't mean ideologies aren't bad, however, and it certainly doesn't mean they can't be false. But if one believes in a bad ideology and yet doesn't act upon it, then there isn't really any problem. But generally, that's not how things work. Our ideology shapes how we see the world, so generally people act based on what they believe. It's very difficult to believe one way and act another. So when someone says they agree with a harmful ideology, such as one that rationalizes the murder of non-believers, there's incentive to either change the person's mind or stay away from them. Because if they truly believe, then they may act upon that belief. And we don't need to generalize here. We can look at ideologies and show when and why they are harmful, and then we can judge anyone who actually commits the action. We need not force anyone to agree, but we can use force to stop others from using their force unjustly on us. And when we look at statistics and see that large number of people think apostates should be put to death, we aren't saying all, but we are saying that attitudes often shape behavior. So we have reason to believe that there will be a greater number of people behaving this way than in places where the belief is uncommon. But again, we only need to hold those accountable who actually act upon the belief, which means we only need to change the mind or stay away from those who act upon these beliefs. And the only way to know for sure is to talk to the person. Sharia law, on the other hand, grants no such individual rights. It is identity politics through and through. Women are worth half as much as men, atheists can be put to death for not identifying with their religion. In contrast, Western values are based on individualism. This is why people say Islam and Western culture is incompatible. Not the people, that is to say, not individual Muslims, but the ideology. So individual Muslims can move to countries with secular Western values and do just fine. But to do so, they have to accept certain ideas that are contrary to their holy book. But Christians pretty much do this anyway, so Islam isn't really any different in that sense. And the Bible has plenty to say about women, non-believers, and homosexuals as well. But the majority of Christians don't actually believe that it would be a good idea to start stoning homosexuals, so a certain amount of cherry picking is required, either by the individual or by the religious leader whom they are getting the religious teaching from. My feeling is that if you have to cherry pick, then you are already thinking about truth from falsehood and right from wrong outside of the context of the holy book you're using to form your worldview. And those attitudes are probably caused by logic and empathy, so you don't need the holy book to form your worldview to begin with. But if people are going to cherry pick, I would greatly prefer them to pick the parts that don't interfere with the lives and well-beings of others. And it seems that most Americans would agree. Look at the Westboro Baptist Church. They cherry pick a little bit differently than most Christians, and I think honestly the problem is that they just don't cherry pick enough. But mostly everyone hates them. But to them, they think they're just following the Bible, and as bad and annoying as they are, it's not like they're going around killing people. If they did, they would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and we must hold everyone to the same standard. In countries where Sharia law is practiced, there is no cherry picking. It's 100% Quranic law. That's what Sharia is after all. So we have to be cautious of the culture shock, by which I mean individuals who grew up in isolation in Muslim countries may not actually understand Western values. This isn't something we want. Because if something is legal in their home country and is illegal in their new country, we can't just give them a pass if they break the law, especially if their crime is something like murder or rape. But we don't want to punish people who are just utterly unaware of Western secular culture. So we need to make sure that they're aware before they're allowed to freely enter our nations. This isn't racism or xenophobia. It has nothing to do with the person themselves and everything to do with what they believe. And that goes for anyone with any belief system that rationalizes harming others. And I want to be perfectly clear on this. It doesn't include anyone who doesn't actually think that way. So I'm not talking about how people look. I'm talking about what they actually believe. And we don't need to suppress or police ideas either, just as long as people don't act upon it, or at least know when they do act upon it, they'll be punished for their crimes. But this becomes an issue when dealing with suicide bombing, because you can't punish someone for their crimes when they're already dead. So we have to prevent such actions as much as possible before they occur. How do we do this? Well, I see two options. The first is to police thought and ban anyone who thinks this way. In other words, keep them away from us. This option is not something I would ever be in favor of. The other option is to change people's minds, and again, we aren't talking about all Arab people or all Muslim people, but all who actually think it's okay to commit suicide bombings. So if the majority of Muslims think suicide bombings or the oppression of women or the killing of blasphemers and apostates is okay, we would probably have better luck changing the ideology than we would trying to change the minds of the majority of individuals that subscribe to that belief system. And we need to look no further than the Muslims who already don't agree with those terrible things. This is why we need to support ex-Muslims who want to reform Islam, not because we want everyone to think a certain way, but because we don't want others to be killed for not thinking a certain way. We need cooperation for society to function properly. Most people want to feel safe, but if you don't, then you can do things to live your life while not infringing on others' safety. At the most extreme, you can move somewhere where nobody cares about the safety of others. But those who get along shouldn't have to deal with others who interfere with their safety and peace of mind. So we are completely justified to want to keep people who wish us harm away from us. But again, we won't know by looking at someone's skin. However, you might know it from their ideology. Think about it like this. If you're talking with someone online who claims to be a white supremacist, you don't need to ask any more questions to be certain that they're a racist, because any sort of racial superiority is racism. Islam, like all religions, is more complex than that, so we can't make such broad generalizations, but it's still an important point. We don't know everything about a person by knowing their religious ideology, but it tells us a lot more than someone's race or gender or any other immutable characteristic. In my experience, Muslims in the US are not too different in their beliefs and acceptance of others as American Christians are, which is to say that most of them are and some of them are not. Just like all groups, there are differing opinions amongst individuals. But most Muslims live in the Muslim world, and most murder perpetrated by Islamist extremists occurs in the Muslim world against other Muslims. This tells us that individuals can be Muslims while still fitting into secular society, but not if they are too extreme with their views, because those extreme views means things like not believing in freedom of speech or freedom of religion. And I'm not talking about all Muslims, I'm talking about those who actually believe in this. And there are non-Muslims who share the similar views, but as of right now, they are for the most part not organized, whereas Islam, or religion in general, is a way to bring people with similar ideas together, which means in places like the Muslim world, where you don't have freedom to believe what you want, people have to hide their opinions or risk death, which means a lot of people don't get exposed to alternative viewpoints. The people who leave and join the Western world are usually able to be open-minded about others, but if they become isolated, then they'll have no chance to experience different points of view than their own, and may not learn about the greatness that is the freedom of liberal democracy. And this is by no means the fault of all Muslims. It is only the fault of those who actually do bad things. But just because it's not Muslim people in general's fault, doesn't mean Islam doesn't have bad ideas, and calling out those bad ideas isn't the same as painting all Muslims a certain way. The same way that I can say that the Bible says to stone gays, and then I can say that you shouldn't stone people for being who they are, I'm not blaming Christians living today. I would blame those who actually perpetrated such an act today, and maybe even those who did it in the past, and even those who were just complacent with those who did it in the past. But aside from that, I'm just talking about the ideas. Similarly, if I say we shouldn't kill apostates, I'm not saying that all or any amount of Muslims think that we should, but I am saying that it's wrong, and anyone who does so is not someone I would consider a friend of free society. Which means I'm also disagreeing with those who haven't actually killed anyone, but agree with the concept of killing blasphemers. That's all I'm saying, and that's okay. We can disagree on a great many things and still coexist peacefully, maybe even as friends. Because I'm not saying that they are evil or stupid, I'm just saying I strongly disagree with them. But I'm also saying that we shouldn't sit back and let people be killed in the name of a fairy tale. In the end, this comes down to culture and the war of ideas. I'm not a cultural relativist. I don't think all cultures are equal, because people may have cultures, but people are not themselves culture. Ideas are culture, and all ideas are not equal. If a culture is full of ideas about bringing harm to others who are different, then we don't have to accept that in our society. We should be tolerant, but we must not be tolerant of intolerance to the point where we let those who are tolerant be killed. We aren't tolerant of murderers. That's why we lock them up in prison. But again, people should be allowed to think however they want, just as long as they don't act upon it. But because belief affects our behavior, we have reason to be cautious of people holding certain ideas. And all they need to do to ease our minds is to realize that murder, rape, and oppression is wrong. Because it is. And the only way for people who hold those beliefs to change is for them to interact with people who are willing to challenge them intellectually. And if the left has a problem with that, then they need to grow up and realize that adults can have tough conversations, and Muslims are no exception. They don't need protection from conversations. They may need protection from actual bigots who wish them harm, the same way that ex-Muslims like Hirsi Ali and Rushdie, who have multiple fatwas on their head, may need protection from those who wish them harm. But they don't need protection from ideas. In an interview with Quillette.com, Hirsi Ali says Islam implies a constitutional order fundamentally incompatible with the U.S. Constitution, and with the Constitution of Liberty that is the foundation of the American way of life. The ultimate goal of Dawa is to destroy the political institutions of a free society and replace them with the rule of Sharia law. Dawa is, strictly speaking, Arabic for proselytizing for Islam, but as Hirsi Ali explains, given the troubling specifics of Islamic doctrine, it is more complex, more sinister, and more far-reaching than that. And as the author correctly points out, make no mistake about it, a future in which an unreformed Islam prevailed would be grim indeed, inimical to every Enlightenment value and every liberal principle, and thus to our constitutional order and the protection it affords minority rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, and so on of all sorts. That such a future is improbable is irrelevant. The threat comes from those willing to kill to bring it about. They, and not Hirsi Ali, are the ones obliging us to have this conversation. The U.S. Constitution grants individual human beings natural, inalienable, God-given rights. Sharia, however, abrogates and supplants those rights to itself. For agents of political Islam, the individual life is merely an instrument, not an end in itself. The ultimate goal of Dawa is to get rid of the non-Islamic political order and replace it with the order of Islamic law. And with all of this, we now have a problem. How do we reform Islam while leaving those who wish no one any harm alone to believe what they want, while still reshaping the ideology to one of greater tolerance and less violence for those who wish to spread Islam through the practice of Dawa? I think the answer is that we have to let people who have experienced the oppression of Sharia law help reach out to other peaceful humans who happen to believe in the same God as this dangerous political movement. And we can't be silent or afraid to call out the problem with Islamist values. And we can't pretend like these ideas are compatible or even comparable to the freedoms granted by Western liberal secular values, like the ones granted by the U.S. Constitution. I would also like to say kudos to Jeffrey Taylor, the author of the article I cited. His article was spectacular and painted Hirsi Ali exactly how I think she should be seen, as an intellectual and an expert who knows what she's talking about on the subject. This was probably one of the best things I've seen out of the media in a long time. I don't know anything else about the author, but I hope he keeps pressing this issue, and if he does, I'll do my best to be in his corner, and I hope after watching this, you will too. Thanks for watching. If you want to talk more about this issue, you can leave a comment, or you can get a hold of me on social media. The links are in the description. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel and share this video everywhere. And thanks again. See you next time.